Hello and welcome to my floss tube channel. I'm Farish and I am always happy to be able to spend some time with you, and I so much appreciate that you're taking this time to spend with me. So last week I mentioned a workshop that's going to happen in Amsterdam featuring Jacob de Graaf, his amazing collection of samplers, and his instruction on two particular type of sampler techniques. But I don't think what I mentioned was that registration is already open. So if you have a hankering to make a trip over to Amsterdam and learn some fascinating things about samplers and to be able to stitch two of Jacob's unique to us designs, then that would be wonderful. I would just love to see you there. So last week I mentioned that in these intervening months that you have not seen episodes from me, I've been sort of making notes about things that matter to me and that I think will matter to you. And the thing I want to talk about today is language. Words matter, and I am finding more and more that we experienced cross-stitchers are using a sort of shorthand. Does anybody even know what shorthand is anymore? Anybody beyond my generation? There's probably a better term I can use, but I can't think of it right now. Anyway, what we have come to do is to sort of abbreviate what we really mean to say. And there's three particular areas that we do it all the time, and I am as guilty as anyone. And they are what we stitch with, what we stitch on, and how we stitch. So let's start by talking about what we stitch with. Now, most of us stitch with a 6-strand floss. Regardless of the brand, the standard of our industry started and is still the prevalent stitching thread is 6-strand floss, regardless of what brand you use. But what we tend to do, and I think right now, industry-wide, worldwide, the most common brand is DMC. It's what I stitched with exclusively in the 80s and the 90s, and then I discovered Cosmo, and that's what I stitch with now. But both brands are 6-strand floss. Right now, what you hear around a table at a retreat or wherever stitchers are gathered, people will say things like, I'm stitching with DMC. Now, DMC is a French company started by a family in, I want to say, the 1700s outside of Paris. And they chose the area where they had their factory because of the quality of the water, which allowed them to get the most vibrant and consistent dyes for centuries. It's no longer family owned, but that's a whole nother story. So regardless, most people are stitching with DMC floss. So even as designers, when we list the details in our charts, and again, I do this too, we simply say DMC 758, DMC 610, DMC 640, whatever, the brand and the color number. Okay, let me do one of my famous asides here. To my knowledge, there is no one universally accepted list of color names associated with these numbers. Each designer just comes up with their own. And I know I tend to do mine relative to the design itself and the other colors that are in the design. So for example, if I have two greens, I might call one olive green and the other one forest green, just to show their relative difference in intensity. I'm going to use pale, light, medium, dark, very dark. And what in this particular design of mine, what might be the very dark color in another design is medium, because in that design, that particular number is in the middle of the range. So, sorry, I go off on one of my tangents here. But here's the thing about saying simply DMC and a number. DMC makes many different types of threads. The two that we are most familiar with, that we hear the most often, are pearl cotton and 6-strand floss. Floss is also becoming very popular, but they're not the only ones. And let me show you what I mean by pulling out my DMC color chart. This is, as far as I know, the most recent version, but they, you know, and I have kept all of mine over the years, but they all have the same thing. And by the way, here's another one of my sides. To try to get the lighting right, there's like a ring around the apparatus I'm using that holds my phone, which I'm using as my camera. But when I put on my glasses, you get this. But in order to read the DMC book, I'm going to have to wear them. Okay, so let's go to the other camera here and show you what I mean. So a lot of people do not realize this, but across the top of each column, there's a designation. 117, 115, 3, 115, 5, 116, 5, 116, 8, 116, 12. They are different threads that all come in these colors. So for example, okay, they don't all come in every color. And here's where I need to explain that to you. When you follow this down, like this first color right here, 894, it comes in 117. It comes in 115 number 3, 115 number 5. It does not come in 116 number 5, but it does come in 116 number 8. It does not come in 116 number 12. Here's quite a few that only come in the 117, and 117 is our 6-strand floss. So that's what we have to be aware of. And again, I take much of my content from what I read on social media and what I hear at retreats that I attend or classes that I teach. So it happens that a new stitcher goes to a big box store. I'd like to hope that if they go to a traditional cross-stitch store, this would not happen. But they go to a big box store and they see that they need DMC. Let me pick one that's, let's go back to that color. So their chart calls for DMC 894. And what they end up buying is 115 number 3, which is a pearl cotton. And the same thing happens when we talk about fabric. How often do you hear someone say, I'm stitching on Aida over 1? Well, let me just stop you right there. To me, this is like nails on a chalkboard. Another one of those archaic things. Anyway, when you are stitching on Aida, unless you're using it in a non-traditional way, you're always stitching 1 cross stitch and 1 square. So there is no need to say over 1 or over 2, because technically, when you make 1 cross stitch in an Aida square, you're stitching over 4. Every Aida square is made up of 4 threads crossing 4 threads. And when you look at it really closely, you can see that every other square, the uppermost thread varies between whether it's on a horizontal or a vertical. And this is what gives Aida its distinctive weave. It is one of the reasons why many people enjoy stitching on Aida, because the fact that each square is 4 threads crossing 4 threads, it makes the square less movable, and the holes where you are planning on making your stitch it makes those holes more distinctive from the holes between each one of the threads making up the Aida square. I'm going to talk more about this in another episode, because for me, I could talk for an hour about the weaves of the various fabrics that we use. But suffice it to say, when you're stitching on Aida, you're just stitching on Aida. There's a difference in counts. There's a difference, obviously, in colors. But do me a favor and just refrain from saying that you're stitching over one on Aida. But for right now, let's just set aside the whole question of whether a person's stitching over one or over two. What I find most frequently that happens is that people will say, I'm stitching on Zweigart. Well, Zweigart makes dozens of different types of fabric. Zweigart is both a brand and a manufacturer. And when you look at the different types of fabrics they offer, and then consider the number of different counts those fabrics may come in and the different colors, it's thousands and thousands of different units. So we do need to be a little bit more specific. I kind of, to make an analogy here, it's kind of like a person giving you a recipe and they say 2 cups of flour, but they don't tell you it's self-rising flour. Then your recipe is not going to come out the same. Or they use regular flour and you are accustomed to using self-rising. So let's look at Zweigart as a manufacturer. So there are manufacturers that make the product we stitch with. And then there are the importers who then bring those fabrics from all over the world and may put their own brand on them. And a good example of that would be Legacy Linens. They are distributed by Access Commodities, and they bring in linens from more than one mill. They have a standard of quality, and that's what's consistent across the range of what they offer. Whereas if we talk about Zweigart, everything that's got the Zweigart name on it is manufactured by Zweigart, and I believe at this point in time is also made in Germany. So that's the difference between a manufacturer and a importer. Then you've got the language of wholesalers and your retail. Now, a wholesaler is somebody who only sells to designers and shops, people with a wholesale account with them. A wholesaler is not going to sell directly to a consumer unless they also have a retail outlet. So I guess I need to clarify that too. A person can be both a wholesaler and a retailer. I guess in a way that's me, because now this is not fabric, but I sell my charts as a wholesaler to shops, and then as a retail outlet, I have my Etsy store. Okay, but let's get back on the topic of fabric. So then there are also the people who do the overdying, and most of them are pretty clear about the base they use. And a lot of people who do overdying only, for example, use Zweigart fabric. Some overdyers do not declare what their base fabric is, and I mean, that's their business, and as a consumer, you can either ask them or not, if it doesn't matter to you. So that's where we get really confusing, because, for example, you can be stitching on a fox and rabbit overdyed fabric that's manufactured, the base fabric is manufactured by Zweigart. So Zweigart's making the fabric in Germany. They are shipping it to Fox and Rabbit in Australia. Bren is dyeing it, and then as a wholesaler, he's selling it to your local needlework store. And that's how it gets to you in the marketplace. So think about when you are, especially talking to a beginner, to be as clear as you can about what you're stitching with and what you're stitching on. Now, before I leave this topic of fabric, though, I do want to also use another analogy, sort of like using breakfast cereals. So you can buy cornflakes from many different brands. A store brand will usually have it. Of course, you've got Kellogg's. You've got other cereal manufacturers who make cornflakes. It's a more generic term. Aida is one of those generic terms. Aida is made by Witchell. It is made by Zweigert. It is made by Charles Graaf. So you can have, and more. I mean, they're not the only ones that make Aida. But when it comes to some linens and some even weaves, the name of the fabric is more like a brand, like Cocoa Puffs. If you buy Cocoa Puffs, there's only one Cocoa Puffs. I haven't brought breakfast cereal in a long time, so I'm hoping I'm using good examples there. If I'm not, then forgive me. So, for example, Jobelin is a Witchell fabric. Monaco is a Charles Graaf fabric. They're both even weaves. And in this Zweigert line for even weaves, you've got Lugana, Devosa, Davos. So you've got certain fabrics that are associated with certain manufacturers. Yet they're all even weaves. So if I really wanted to be specific, I would say I'm stitching on Lugana from Zweigert. If I say I'm stitching with Lugana and the person's in the know, they know that that's a Zweigert fabric, but most of them don't. In fact, you may not know that. Okay, and then the same thing with some linens. When it comes to Zweigert, all Edinburgh linen is 36 count. All Belfast is 32 count. All Cashel is 28 count. They are all Zweigert fabrics. Back in when they first started marketing their fabrics, they came up with the idea of naming each one of their fabrics, each one of their linens, after a city or a place or a person. And then once they use that name, like Edinburgh, then that would only be used for their 36 count linen. And by the way, even all linen, and I've said this before, but it bears repeating, all linen should be made 100% from the flax plant. It should not be a blend of fabrics. Even weaves are all blends. If they were made completely of flax, they would say that. Most of them are a combination of cotton and man-made fabrics. Roughly 50-50. They may be 48-52, in that range. And that's what gives them the ability to produce a fabric where the stitching threads, the threads used in weaving, are of a consistent shape and size, as opposed to linen, which can vary. And again, like I say, that's a whole nother topic. So I hope this has helped you understand a little bit more about how our industry names things and how they are used, how they're marketed, etc. So just like DMC is a brand name, Cosmo is a brand name, both of those companies make more than just 6-strand floss. Zweigert is both a brand name and a manufacturer. As far as I know, Wiltschild is an importer as opposed to a manufacturer. If somebody has different information than that, then please just politely let me know that. So that's what I wanted to say about fabric and how we can be more clear in the way we communicate both as professionals, I'm going to start being more careful about how I describe things in my own publications, and when we talk with other people about our craft and what we're doing and answering questions, just to be a little bit more clear. So the last thing is, and this is confuses a lot of people, and I finally went to the expert. I went to Doug Krynick, and I said, Doug, I have got to know the difference between plies and strands. I want to know for certainty that I'm using the terms correctly, and to kind of understand the difference. So he used this example. Which may, actually there's two examples I can think of. Okay, so think of, I'm just going to say it, it's kind of weird. Think of toilet paper. Most toilet paper that we buy in the United States is a 2-ply paper. Most tissues that we buy are 2-ply. We don't take the toilet paper apart to use it. We don't take the tissues apart to use them. I don't have a roll of toilet paper handy, but I can grab a tissue. Okay, so this is just your regular tissue, just pulled right out of the tissue box. But you can see where you can separate it into 2 pieces. And the manufacturers make it this way because the 2 plies of tissue are actually stronger than the single. So think of it this way. Each individual strand of floss is like a tissue. And like the tissue that's made up of 2-ply, your individual strand of floss is also made up of plies. And you wouldn't take the tissue apart, so you're not going to take your strand apart. I don't know how far that analogy can be taken. I once learned in a class, and I found this to be true, that any analogy or metaphor will break down at some point. But the thing that has helped me from this explanation from Doug Krynick is to always be clear which is the ply and which is the strand. So for example, a single strand of embroidery floss taken out of a 6-strand skein, if you play with it, you can actually untwist it a little bit and see that it's 2-ply. So you will not, it's not recommended that you stitch with a single ply of floss. It is just not strong enough. I'm also going to add a link to an engineering video that I found that really explains plies and how they are used to strengthen the overall strand. It's very short, and I just found it absolutely fascinating, and you can really apply it to our craft. At any rate, hopefully that will help you distinguish and remember when to use the term ply and when to use the term strand. Okay, so every stitcher, regardless of what they're stitching with, what they're stitching on, how many strands are stitching over, how many threads are stitching over, uses 4 basic supplies and tools: fabric, thread, a needle, and scissors. Today I particularly want to talk about protecting your scissors and keeping those needles handy. These are 2 things, notions, whatever you want to call them, that I came across that I absolutely adore, so I added them to my Etsy store. One of them is, I think, essential in protecting the points of your scissors, and not only protecting them in terms of keeping them sharp and keeping them from bending, but also to protect the stuff that's in the bag with your scissors, that those nice sharp points don't poke a hole in your fabric, for example. They come in 6 different colors, and I just love to just pick out a color that kind of goes with the scissors that I'm using, or goes with the my fob or the project that I'm stitching. They're relatively inexpensive and are designed to protect what is, for many stitchers, I should say, one of their most expensive tools, and that's a good pair of scissors. If you don't have a sheath of some sort to protect the points of your scissors, strongly recommend that you look into that. It will keep them in good shape. A good pair of scissors will last your lifetime. I love hearing stories from people who are still stitching with their grandmother's scissors, for example. And then the other thing are needles. How many times have you gotten to a place, you're getting your car serviced or whatever, you're ready to stitch, and you discover you don't have your needles? So this is another thing that I love. It doesn't come in as many colors as the scissor sheath, but they are called needle carry card. I just call them needle cards. They're about the size of a credit card. Oh, pardon the noise. That's really noisy, isn't it? And they have a hole on them so that you can attach them to your thread drop ring or whatever you're using. And then instead of having my needles just scattered all over the place, and this works for just about any size needle. I mean, there's a needle that I used for my needlepoint project. Here's a much finer one that I use for my cross stitch. And if you're wondering, you know, will the needles fall out? I've been using one for over a year. I decided I wanted to use it for a while before I promoted it. And I'm finding that my needles don't fall out. It can even keep a couple of counting pins in there. And then if I'm not going to put it on my thread drop, what I do is just attach a little lobster clasp to it. And whoops, sorry, I don't have my glass. See, I don't have my glasses on, so that I don't have those funny little, got it. So you can, you know, attach a string of beads or something to it, just to sort of bling it up. And also, again, when you're at a retreat, it's a way of distinguishing your stuff from somebody else's. It's a way, it's an identifier. It's also a way of expressing your creativity. So those are 2 things I absolutely always have in my stitching bag. And the other thing is, I guess the other universal truth is that as much as we love stitching, we also know that we have to do unstitching from time to time. So this has been my absolute saving grace here when I've had to take things out. Here I've got this one out of the thing, and that's not showing up very well here against the dark background. Let me put something white under here so you can see a little bit better. What I like about this, as I'm aging and getting a little bit of arthritis, actually more than a little bit, having a handle on it really makes it easier. And what this basically is a tapestry needle that's embedded in the handle. So, and it has a nice little plastic cover over this part of it. So that's an absolute must-have. All 3 of these things are always in my stitching bag. And I find that it's making my stitching time more enjoyable. So anyway, I have really been thinking about what we talked about last week about the goals, and I had to ask myself, am I infringing on my enjoyment of stitching if they're associated with goals? And I think the answer to that question is kind of a broad spectrum. They can infringe upon that enjoyment, or they can foster that enjoyment depending on how they are set. And I think that what I have concluded for myself is that I am looking for mindful stitching. I want to enjoy the process. I don't want to hurry. I don't want to quantify. I don't want to be stressed by it. So unless a project has a deadline that I am committed to, if I'm stitching something for a birthday or anniversary or a retirement gift, a Christmas gift, then yeah, that has a deadline to it. But it is a self-imposed deadline, not one that's coming from some exterior force. And I think that makes it acceptable. So what I'm realizing is it's the difference between gulping down a cup of coffee because I'm in a hurry and taking sip by sip and really enjoying it, whether it's tea or coffee or anything else. And I guess the question I have to ask myself is, do we have to rush? More and more social media posts are made about, I stitched 120,000 stitches today, or, oh, woe is me, I didn't meet my goal of 1,000 stitches today. And, you know, if that's not meant as criticism. I mean, if that's truly, again, there is a very big spectrum here of how people approach this. And if quantifying your stitching goals makes it work for you, that's okay. But I guess what I'm wondering, and this is truly wondering, I don't know the answer to this, but what I'm wondering is, are there more mindful stitchers out there and we just are not aware of it? Because what are you going to post? You know, I sat and stitched for an hour and didn't care what I got done. You know, it's not newsworthy. It's not postable. And I think that there's a lot of noise generated in posts where they go along the lines of how many stitches they did, or according to, you know, I use a spinner, and according to my spinner, I'm supposed to be stitching on this, but I really want to stitch on that. Those sort of posts, I think, create a lot of background noise that mindful stitchers start thinking that they're in the minority, or that they're doing something wrong, or that they're not a serious stitcher because they're not doing these things. And I just want to assure you that I'm one of them. So I don't have a bingo card. I don't use a spinner. My stitching at this point is a little different because of the fact that as a professional, I do have deadlines now with trade shows and expectations. For the past 10 years, I have had deadlines associated with creating things for the cruises that we do, the stitching cruises. And of course, whenever I offer a class, I have deadlines. So, I mean, it's not like, you know, that, but to me, that's my professional stitching. That's not my pleasure stitching. Oh man, now I make it sound like I don't enjoy my job. I do. But if you're not stitching professionally, think about it. Are you a mindful stitcher? And if so, can we start making our own post about the piece that we get? Kind of reminds me that very often people will say, oh, I could never do that. I don't have enough patience. And I look at them and I say, it restores my patience. When I am out of patience, if I sit down and stitch, it regenerates whatever little patience I had before. It lets it start expanding and blossoming. And by the end of that hour or afternoon or whatever, I have more patience. I want to say that some of my very best friends have bingo cards and use spinners. So again, I'm not criticizing that. I'm just saying there are people out there who don't do those things. And that's okay. I should also acknowledge that you can do both. You can have a spinner that tells you today is the day to work on a certain project, and then when you sit down to work on it, you're doing mindful stitching. So it is possible. Think about it. If you want to try mindful stitching, let me know how it goes for you. I would love to hear from you. And until we get together again, I hope that you stitch happy and stay safe. I'll see you later.